Agenda Item 1, which is a Public Realm Action Plan. Who's presenting?
Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners.
Morning.
It's been a couple years since we did the Public Realm Action Plan, and we realized that the only folks that were involved in that process were the Mayor and Commissioner Nearing. So we thought it was a perfect opportunity to come back and kind of refresh the goals and the objectives that we're trying to meet with the Public Realm Action Plan. So I'd like to introduce Matt Lister from Gehl and Kate DeSantis. Matt's been Managing Director of Gehl for 5.5 years in the New York office, and Kate's been with them 4 years, and she's a project manager that's been helping drive a lot of the projects with me here in West Palm.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Thanks for having us here again. We always love being back in West Palm Beach and seeing how much transformation is happening. Before I began, I wanted to ask a question of you all to just go with me on a thing here. I've been doing this a lot when I visit other places, and I wanted to ask if you could just sit for a second and think of a memorable experience that you've had in a city. And it could be here, but it could be other cities as well. So would you mind just thinking about that for a second and getting that image in your head? And I want you to think about what made that experience memorable. Does everybody have an image? Would anybody be willing to share their memory really quick? This goes much better if somebody actually does it. Yeah.
Well, I was thinking in proximity, so I was right across the street at Field of Greens, and it's a very popular lunch spot, so there wasn't a whole lot of space, extra seats available, and I was waiting for a few others to join me, so I had just me sitting at a table of 4, and somebody was looking for a seat, and so I didn't want him to think that I was just being rude and taking up a table of 4, so I offered him to sit down next to me because my folks were running late. And we ended up striking up a conversation and realized we had something in common, and ended up being a great situation. So
That's awesome. That's great. And so the thing that made that memorable was that interaction probably between people. Does anybody else share your memory?
I was in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco, and the greenery in the park was, it just stood out.
Good. So in that case, it wasn't an interaction; it was just the environment itself.
Right.
And so that lands itself as a memory. Anyone else?
I was in Boston recently and had the occasion to just walk around the city down by, what's a place by? Faneuil Hall, that's what it was, yes.
Nice. That was good. That was.
But I wasn't there with Rick, no. But no, it was a beautiful day, which is rare in Boston. And so I just had the occasion to walk from the hotel, and I was with some family members, and we, just the walking between the hotel and Faneuil Hall and exploring the city by foot was unique.
That's great. Okay, so thank you for sharing that. I asked that of lots of people. I think one of the things that's interesting to me is, usually people talk about something delicious that they ate, or they were overcome by the greenery, or they had a personal human connection, right, with somebody else. And often what I think is interesting is that it does come down to that human connection piece, about creating places that foster human connection, creating places that are actually about human scale places that feel good to a human being. If you ask architects that question, they're all going to talk about the building, so I don't like asking architects about it, actually. I want to hear what other people have to say. So I want to thank you for that, and I'd like to just have people keep that in mind when I start going through some of the stuff here. So I was asked to come and talk a little bit about overall what Gehl's approach has been, and then some highlights of what has happened over the last few years, and where we've seen some successes and where we think there may be some more challenges going forward. So I'm going to burn through this as quickly as possible. We are a firm that has offices in New York, in San Francisco, and in Copenhagen. We've worked in over 250 cities all over the world. We've worked in really small towns. We've worked in big cities. We've been studying how people interact in cities for almost 40 years. The practice is about 20 years old. We've got 65 people in the firm, and 12 of them are in New York, which is the office that I run. And we've been having so much fun actually working down here with you all in West Palm Beach and sharing that story. We'll talk a little bit about this with other cities that we work in, because we think there's so much here actually to learn from, which would be great to also talk about. I want to just talk a little bit too about the stakes. We're all in a room right now. All of you have lots on your mind because you are in the practice of making cities. And that means that you're thinking about banner headline issues, right? Like equity and economic development and affordability and public health and public safety. These are big topics. From a physical health perspective, we know that we've got 5 million annual deaths globally from inactivity, right? The shape and character of our cities is something that influences that number. This is big stuff. When it comes to environmental sustainability, transportation now tops power generation as the top U.S. source of CO2 emissions, okay? So big banner headline stuff. We see an increase in issues around mental health, right? And that we know that people who are socially isolated have less mental health, have harder mental health issues, and that becomes a real public health issue. Happiness and well-being, as it turns out, is tied to how we spend our time and how we're able to spend our time. So they know that if you remove an hour from the commute, that's the equivalent happiness of a 40% pay increase, which is totally mind-blowing. Social equity and community cohesion, which we think about a lot, and actually I think we've done some really fun and interesting things here in West Palm Beach around this issue. We know that direct interpersonal contact between small-scale groups actually can reduce intergroup bias, and that's like a really complicated way of saying we just get along better if we're around each other more. I've been thinking a lot about loneliness, right? And I don't want to bring the room down, but loneliness is a problem that has been increasing in the country, right? And loneliness is as lethal as smoking 15 cigarettes per day. That's pretty heavy duty. People are talking about how social fragmentation is actually the core challenge of our time. It's really rough to think about it that way, but we live in a world where we see the impacts of social fragmentation. We long to be together, but we're apart. And so what does this have to do with us and all of us in this room is that we think that our challenge is to make places that foster and nurture human connection. We can talk about safety, right? Public safety, that's super important. But that's actually should be an outcome, perhaps, of a larger objective of fostering places that create human connection. And it's because, as human beings, we have this desire to connect and shape and share experiences with one another. We also know that when people share experiences in public spaces, when people connect and create community, when places are transformed to invite new connections, and certainly West Palm Beach is an example for the rest of the world about creating places that invite new connections. When people discover new things about themselves and others, what they're doing is participating and actually creating public life, which is what we think of as what we all create when we live our lives outside of their homes and our businesses and our cars. And the interesting thing about this is it's not a silver bullet. But it turns out if you make cities, into places that support public life, you can start to tick off some of these big banner headline issues, right? A city that's more walkable and bikeable has better public health and public safety outcomes. A city that invites more people in and is vibrant, right, is a city that's better at attracting and retaining talent. Genuine, well-functioning public spaces are public spaces for everybody. And that's an equity conversation, right, which is super important. It's the thing that you can offer to everybody within a city. So we believe that public life, this is the thing that we've been caring about and studying for a long time, and it's the thing that's been driving a lot of the work that we've been doing together here in West Palm Beach, is the drive shaft of a great city. A lot of urban design firms will start with buildings and then shape the public spaces And then kind of like, if you build it, they will come, hope for public life. And what we think is that we need to understand what the shape and character of public life is, what kind of life do we want to make invitations for first, and then allow that to determine the strategy for space and public space management and public space design and ultimately development. That you kind of need to flip it on its head when you're thinking about cities. And we've definitely seen evidence, right? We've all been in lots of places that have been certainly well considered from a design perspective, but the people part of it all was sort of left alone, right? Don't worry about it, we'll just put more people in the renderings. We've definitely seen lots of renderings, tons of people, and then it gets built and they aren't there. And you might think in that case that we're actually not very good as human beings at designing for human beings, but it couldn't be further from the truth. Like, I love cars, actually. I don't own a car because of where I live. It's too expensive for me to do that, but I certainly love when I have the opportunity to drive a car or rent a car, I do that. And I'm astonished by how incredibly good human beings are at designing for human beings, right? So if you look at this car, this is the progression. We have been steadily improving to the point where I get in a car these days and I put my hand on the steering wheel and there's actually a place for my pinky finger, right? Every aspect of it is designed intentionally and focused intentionally to be sweet and kind to the human body. And then the other part of this is that we've made the interior of the car so wonderful, and then we had to make the rest of the environment around it wonderful for the car, right? We are incredibly good at optimizing towards a specific outcome. And often when we optimize towards a specific outcome, we forget that we're working within a system, right? Like 50 years ago, we said we're going to go to the moon. We went to the moon. Unbelievable, right? We look at McDonald's, we said we want it to be cheaper, faster, and delicious. We nailed it, but it's not working so well in the system. We think about these iPhones, another example of how the smartest people in the world, when given a very specific idea and saying, I want you to make a thing that will capture everybody's attention as much as possible. And they 100% achieved it because human beings are really good at designing things for human beings. And so our question is really, what if we approached the way we think about our cities with the same intention, with that same care, and with that same thought? What if our objective in the city was, we want to create places that nurture and foster human connections with the same laser-focused attention that we designed an iPhone, that we designed the interior of a car, that we went to the moon, yada, 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 right? The way that works for us is that we really understand who our client is. The iPhone designers knew everything about the way the human brain works, right? The people that designed the interior of a car, they know ergonomics, like they are so concerned and intentional about making something for a person. And so in our world, we know that our client, human beings, are slow, linear, horizontal, maximum 3 mile per hour walking creatures that have a great interest in other people, right? We also know that the human brain needs things. The human mind needs stimulation, like 1,000 per hour, which is about 1 per every 4 seconds, is the kind of stimulation that the human mind needs to feel alive and to feel good. We walk at about 3 miles per hour, all of us, and so when you walk down a really great street, it's interesting to note that at 3 miles per hour, 1 per every 4 seconds is about 20 to 24 feet. And so this feeling good on a street like this is in our biology, right? The other thing that we need to be aware of is that despite all of the cultural differences between us, there's so much about us that is the same. We're all more or less the same size, right? We all use our senses in the same way. We all walk at around the same speed. That thing that I talked about before about the 1 per every 4 seconds, what's interesting, because we study this stuff, we know that this wall, which is the finest stone that money can buy, but it's a blank wall, people will walk past it faster and think that it takes longer. And so if you think about a city with blank concrete walls or empty parking lots, and we start to ask ourselves, why are people not walking from one place to another, and they're filled with those experiences? That's why. It's in our physiology and our biology to not want to be around that blank lack of richness. So we look at cities and we understand what the ground floor facade qualities are. We rank them from very active to inactive. We'll talk a little bit about what we have found here in West Palm Beach. But it helps us be specific about the reasons why things are working and why they're not. The other thing that we do is we talk deeply about public space quality. So every single one of you in this room is actually a public space quality expert, right? We all walk through our daily lives and we make little minute decisions all the time based on the inputs that we see. So it's hot down here, super sunny. If there's shade, you're going to move to the shade. We're just designed that way. If you're walking down a street and it's super dark there and you don't know too much about it, you're probably not going to go down the dark alley. If you're walking on a sidewalk and it starts to become kind of crumbled and broken up, you're probably going to move in a different direction. So we're all experts at this. And one of the things that we've done is boil down public space quality to these 12 criteria just to make it easier for us to talk about quality, right? So the top one is protection and safety. If you have a public space where people don't feel protected or safe, they won't go there. The second one is comfort, right? If you have a public space that's protected and safe but doesn't provide elements of comfort, people might go, but they won't stay very long at all. And then the third category is enjoyment and delight. And these are the elements within the city that land those memories that we just talked about earlier, right? And so wonderful places land themselves on the mental maps. For us, we're data-driven, right? And so we've been studying the way that people move through a space, move through public places all over the world for years. We think it's important that we measure what we care about. Engineers, they measure what they care about, and then they optimize around the measurements, right? And so we want to know how are people using a public space? And then because we're interested in inviting more people to stay in a public space, that's the thing that makes it vibrant. We want to know what they're doing when they've made the decision to stay. So we'll actually we did this here in West Palm Beach, an army of volunteers to go out and observe with their eyes and count the number of people in a place and look at what they're doing and see who is there, because the only way to improve a place is to actually know what's going on in the first place. The other thing I'll note is that observation and getting out in the world is actually really incredible. It's really important. Like, I would love for the next time we talked, for all of us to actually go out and walk and listen and learn and smell and hear all of this together. This person right here in a conventional planning process is a dot on a map and is referred to as a pedestrian, which is kind of an abstract term, right? And being there with this person means that you smell the cars, you feel the anxiety, you hear the noise, and it changes the way that you think, that we all think about decision making when it comes to providing for human beings in the public realm. For us, it's about learning how people actually behave instead of how we think they behave. A lot of planning is predicated on an assumption of behavior instead of actual knowledge of behavior. We've just come out with this new book, which I think would be, we could share some copies with you. I just realized I probably shouldn't be pitching a book in front of the commission, but the point about this is that we think that thinking about the city as a soft city, so much of the city is hard and fixed, and actually really great places are a bit softer and more flexible and are designed to, again, accommodate people and the interfaces and daily moves that people make. The soft city is about moving closer, getting together, and connecting people to one another, to everyday aspects of life. I'm going to burn through some of this because I'm probably going over time. This is a city that thinks about the public spaces, the streets, the plazas, the parks, as dynamic environments that are for everybody. The 21st century street is a street that's used for all kinds of things, not just movement, right? And we have examples of how that's working here. When we recognize the soft city, it's not complicated stuff, right? It's about providing seating when somebody's tired. This is a project in Sao Paulo that we did, and we called these women with their dog an indicator species. They were actually in a plaza that was completely overcome by drug dealing and violence, and when they put this project in, it changed the dynamic of the space. And when we saw people with their dogs in there, we knew that things had changed, right? This is the indicative species of change in a place like this. Little moments like this is just, there was a dance class and they put a window on the street so that people could watch in, right? Those parts of the city that connect us to one another. This is a table in a restaurant that's kind of all over the Northeast now, and one of the like dramatic innovations that they did was to put a communal table in, right? Pretty funny, but that's what it is, and that's a really important, simple thing to do. I like this one because it has nothing to do with people. This is the way that the cats get into the, just like little elements of care and thought, right? This is another soft city thing. This is in Melbourne, Australia, where The bars closed at like 2 a.m. and they were having this issue where like these guys would come out and be brawling with each other. They'd be drunk and they'd be like showing off for their girlfriends. And so Rob Adams said, "All right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to put a flower shop in there. We're going to give them a great deal, but they have to stay open all night." And what happened was that all the brawling went down after the flower shop went in, because he believes it's because these guys came out with their macho thing and instead bought flowers for their girlfriends instead of fighting with each other. But these like little things actually that don't seem so big, but actually make a huge impact on the way a place feels. So Gehl and West Palm Beach, we've been hanging out with you guys here for a few years now, and it started with some really fun tactical things that we did with the DDA. I'm not going to get into super detail, but we started to introduce the idea about collecting and observing public life data within the place. In May 2016, we did a citywide public space, public life survey and looked at multiple neighborhoods and their adjacent connections to downtown. We released the Public Realm Action Plan, which I'll share some highlights to. The other thing that we talked about in the city of West Palm Beach is that in places where this stuff works really well, you actually have to change a little bit the way that you work inside City Hall. And so that started this pretty amazing experiment of creating an Office of Public Life, which was the first one in the country. And I run around the country telling everybody that this was the first place that ever did it. My CEO was just in Singapore actually talking about West Palm Beach because of this idea. We know it's an idea in evolution, but the point of it is that having an entity or a person that can look across the agencies, right? Because the Department of Transportation has very specific goals and parameters, economic development, same, Parks and Rec, same. When you want to create a place that supports public life, you kind of need to think of it as an umbrella, and it's working well in those places. One of the first projects out of the gate for the Office of Public Life actually was this amazing pilot project in the Northwest neighborhood, which we'll share a little bit more about in a minute. But I'll just say it's been super exciting to watch a process like this unfold and to be involved in this way. So taking stock of public space and public life in West Palm Beach, these are just excerpts from the Public Realm Action Plan. You know, we looked at pretty significant parts of West Palm Beach when we did this. As I said before, we asked an army of volunteers to fan out and really study the place. We also did a lot of civic engagement. So we asked Palm Beachers, what do you value in public spaces? And it's natural beauty and greenery, liveliness and fun, sociability, comfortable microclimate, walkability and accessibility. And so some of the key takeaways from this process were we recognize that quality invites quantity, which is that the high quality spaces and places in West Palm Beach actually invite more people in, and we can show that through the data. We found of the places that we looked at, there were basically like 3 or 4 spots in the city where quality layered up, where you had shade, active facades, good lighting, and programming and activation and seating. These 3 places 100% correlated with activity. So the more, you can see it here. So these are graphs that show the level of activity in these places. And, you know, City Place, Clematis East and West, those are the places that have significantly more people in them. And it's because they're high quality places. This is what we call stationary activity mapping. You know, the most favorite places were the plaza at City Place and then Clematis down by the waterfront. The other thing that we saw is that it's a compact city. It takes 20 minutes to get from one side of the city to the other walking. That's extraordinary. But nobody's doing it because it's actually quite fragmented, right? You get a stretch of a block and a half of good, and then it's broken up by another block and a half of not so good. And so that's something that we can fix. These are the things that we see in the places where people aren't walking, right? There's just obstructions. And by the way, this is a common issue. It's not just West Palm Beach. We see this all over the world. But we also see that when people feel invited, you get, 1,000 people an hour. Like, that's heavy duty. That's really good volume. That's really good public life. The other thing that we see is that there are reasons to go but not to stay. So there's been a lot of investment in public art, amazing public art in the city. And what we saw is that people would come there, but because the opportunity for comfort wasn't provided, people were not staying. So it's this idea of layering in comfort now. You did the art, you got the places, now we layer in more and make these places that are for people to stay. So we say, look, but don't stay, actually. I'm going to burn through this. It's a city ready for a transition. Nobody here is suggesting that the city of West Palm Beach needs to be without cars at all. What we're suggesting is that it could be a city that actually provides more options. We don't have to give up our automobility to also provide walkability and bikeability. And so, I'm not selling anybody anything new, but there are some connector streets that actually become divider streets because they're so wide, right? And you see, and when that happens, you see things like this, right? Where people are trying to get across a very wide street and need a little help. It could take nearly 11 minutes to cross Okeechobee given the light timing. And when you think about having a convention that wants to get to Rosemary Square, we should probably figure out a way to fix that. It's pretty simple stuff because we want to get all those people to come in and eat all that food. It's a city of neighborhoods with different public space experiences, right? We all know this, that some neighborhoods have really wonderful experiences and other neighborhoods are not feeling that yet. And part of the Rosemary project, actually the Northwest project, was to start to think about ways to shift that imbalance if we do want to be a city for everybody. Parks provide an incredible mix of activities, but for the number of parks that are there, we actually think the usage could be much better. Right? And so one of the ways to know that is to just measure it and see who's there. Can we get these numbers up? Can we decide that we're going to do that? So we set a vision for the public realm with strategies and tactics to get there. These are some highlights, right? We want to prioritize comfortable connections. So whenever we're investing in a place whenever we're investing in streets or any kind of infrastructure, we hope that investment is also about making a connection that's more comfortable than it was before, right? We want to focus and create extreme quality places. So there's so much excitement and energy around doing lots and lots of things across the city of West Palm Beach, but it might be good to pick 2 or 3 and really focus down and make those things extraordinary and then move on to the next one. I think one of the things we see in cities is that ambition is great, but spreading thin actually doesn't work. And so it's hard politically to pick, but it would be great to prioritize and pick to make something wonderful. Embrace and dignify human scale mobility. Fill in the gaps on the streetscape, right? The planning department is working hard to make sure that the development that's happening in the city is actually going to generate that 1 per every 4 seconds thing rather than a blank wall, right? Super important stuff. Ensure equitable access to great places. So it isn't about just making the right place good, it's about making sure you can get to it more easily, right? And not having to cross a giant 4-lane highway terrified, right, would be something to work towards. We also was like, look, you're West Palm Beach, the water is there, it's extraordinary. When we surveyed people, most people said one of their favorite places was the waterfront. So how do we help people get to the waterfront equitably? And then let public life data drive design. So if we're going to be really focused about it, we need to actually measure what our success is and then hold ourselves accountable to those measurements and promote authentic community engagement. So, we came up with this series of ideas a few years ago about doing pilot projects to help this city embark upon this and learn from this. The one that was picked was Dance into the Sunset, which was this idea about creating connections from downtown up to the Sunset Lounge. I'm going to share a little bit about what's happened here. We were not involved in all of these things, but we think we think a lot of these projects are actually about building a place that supports public life. And so it's sort of with pride that we see all of these things happening. Citywide lighting improvements, a mobility plan, greenway multipurpose paths. Lots of people are working very hard to commit themselves to this bigger idea, which is wonderful. We just got the data in from the 300 block in Clematis. This totally blew me away, but a year ago, you'd see 470,000 total visitors, around 6,000 on a Saturday average. A typical day is 4,000. The Clematis block goes in, and now you see 10,000 on Saturday, 777,000 total visitors across the year. That's total evidence, right, that these kinds of investments are making a change. And it's not just the streetscape. We know that there's been effort to activate that block with retail and all the other things, but it's all part of the same picture, right, that we're actually making a difference. We talked about the Office of Public Life. I'm going to burn through that. We were involved in Rosemary. We're seeing Rosemary being significantly transformed down at City Place. But then what's totally interesting to us and what makes this story really great is that it's not just at City Place, that you guys are thinking about Rosemary all the way to the Sunset Lounge. For a conversation right now in the country about equity and thinking about investing so that everybody has access to it, this mile is actually this incredible story to tell, right? Where coinciding with the investment at City Place, we're seeing investment now up on the north end. It's a really extraordinary story. And Kate's going to talk a little bit about that story, and hopefully we're not totally wildly over time.
So for the past almost year, we have been working with you guys. A lot of different groups have contributed to create a public space in the historic Northwest. We set out to really create a place for the community to gather. We had gotten some feedback from previous events that there wasn't a space that the community could come together or a space they could use for themselves. And in the process, we also wanted to start to create a new cycle of feedback where we responded to what we heard the community wanted and needed. It's been really amazing, but simple space that's gone up. We've gotten contributions from the DDA in the Taylor Moxie Library that's there. We've gotten the construction company that's working on the Sunset Lounge to contribute materials and time and build. A lot of sweat equity from people at the city have gone in to put this space into the ground. But it's also been amazing to watch the community come out and take ownership over this space and begin to just use it as their own platform. Thank you, Armando. One of the things we learned early on, we held a workshop and we just didn't get a lot of people to come out, and we were trying to think about how we could engage more people and have more voices heard. And we created a survey and then asked some community members from the American Legion to go out and go door to door and ask for people to participate. And so we reached 125 households from that survey. And it was really a breakthrough for the project to figure out, like, what did we need to do to actually reach the community members and speak in a way that they understood and could respond. Also in the process of the 10 months, the community has just come out and stepped up to contribute with stewardship of the project and to help build it. On a weekend event, Wendy actually was out building these pieces of the stage, and some of the kids that were there offered to paint as well. And then the next week they came back with equipment to paint it faster and better and taught other kids in the community how they could use that equipment. Additionally, I think for the last maybe 8 months, various neighbors of the space have been opening and closing the library every day for the community to use. And in a transient community, to have that stability of coming every day to open and close this space for others has been really amazing. We heard also that the community wanted events to take place, and so we hosted, with the city, 4 events, and over 300 people came out. But then the community asked to host events, and they actually started to take ownership of the space, and they since have hosted 12 events that often get over 300 people in a single event that happens. So that, and it's also been amazing that there's been a family reunion on the space. There's been an Easter egg hunt. There's been a group come with a culinary tour to see the space. Every 4th Friday, the community hosts a networking event and invites local businesses out to the space to network with each other and kind of create opportunity. That often looks like this, a lot of fun. This latest addition here in the bottom right corner is a serving container that allows people to, right now it acts as a bar, but also 3 or 4 local people that cook out of their home right now as their business want to come serve lunch on the space on a daily basis, and have asked to be able to do that, which is this amazing thing that, like, the space in the community is creating opportunity for people to improve their own lives and also pursue things they're passionate about. Again, when we have events on the space, we ask people to fill out a little survey. What do you like? What do you want more of? What can we do? And then we do that. And as a result, we've created a more positive feedback cycle with them, and this way that they know just to reach out to Wendy. They can ask for things. We also have a platform once a month or twice a month that we can share with them updates about the neighborhood. And there's over 300 people to tell, and they tell their friends, and they tell their neighbors. And we've just expanded the communication that we have with this group of people in this community. It's also, in the 10 months that it's been open, there have been maybe a handful of things that have been broken or vandalized. And I think it's really just challenged the stigma that we couldn't give anything to this community. And they've really made this space their own. And it's been a really great way to get the community excited about the longer-term capital investment that's coming. There's a lot of amazing things planned in the neighborhood, from Rosemary Ave, from the Sunset Lounge, from a new park, And in this way, in engaging the community and giving them this space to activate themselves, we hope that that can also translate to the park when it comes online. And they will already have this muscle built of how do we use this park? What can we do with this space? How can it help us? So we are just getting ready to start off another phase of work, and we hope that we can learn from this first phase about making this a more everyday destination that people spend time in, that they know it's there for them. And then we can continue building this cycle of community-driven engagement where we listen to how how to communicate with them and meet them where they are. So we have a couple things planned. At the core, we're going to invite a group of community leaders that hopefully maybe are growing businesses themselves and empower them, give them some skill building, and then let them have the space and some money to host an event themselves and hopefully build some awareness for their project and their space. We also want to make some iterations on the design of the site to learn more about what the community wants in the neighborhood, and then document all of this so that this can be a process that we can use in other neighborhoods and think about how we can influence the conversation that you guys are having with other neighborhoods across the city. So we'll end with this quote that is part of the new Soft City book that we just released. But a society can be stone hard that it fuses into a block. A people can be so bone hard that life goes into shock. And the heart is all in shadow, and the heart has almost stopped, till some begin to build a city as soft as a body. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioners? Is this on? Yeah. Any questions, observations? Will we be updating some of the findings, or we're just operating under the assumption that the findings we did, because those studies was done, what, 2017?
Yeah.
So we're in 2019 now.
Yeah, so I think the cities that are doing this well will continue to measure, right? And I think it would be great, as a function perhaps of Wendy's role or others, to keep measuring so that we know what's working and what's not. I think at Rosemary Square, they're going to be starting to measure to see what's happening there as the construction finishes. It was pretty extraordinary to hear the data come out of Clematis. There's a bunch of data that's coming out of the Northwest neighborhood where we're able to say we have significant increases in people that are going there. We're starting to get anecdotal information about new relationships being made, but I think that it's super important to keep measuring and continue to update.
One of the things I'd like help on is messaging. We have, and you alluded to it, we have a city that's in transition. West Palm Beach has been very car-oriented for years. And now we are trying to make that transition to, at least in certain parts of the city, to make it more walkable, more bikeable. I think the message has to get out that those two goals are not inconsistent. To have a city that's more walkable, more pedestrian-friendly, that's more bike-friendly, does not mean we're getting rid of cars. We're not going into people's homes and taking away keys. So I think we need help in messaging. Have there been any other communities, particularly in the southeast, that have undergone this transition that we might look to for messaging help?
I'd have to go back and look to see communities in the southeast. Look, the progressive cities in the United States are all going through this right now, right? And I think it's challenging because we're talking about a multi-generational shift, perhaps, and it's, I don't think it serves the argument well, as you just said, to suggest that we need to live without our cars. I think what we have seen is that people go through mindset shift when they experience things themselves, right? And so in some of the cities that we've worked, you've probably done this here, where they have open streets or they have events where portions of the street at times of the day are shut down just to experience what it's like to go from one side of the city to the other on a bike. And I think more and more people that have those experiences starts to develop a broader constituency for change. But the other side of it, and this is where I think sometimes a movement gets in the way of the actual progress, is that we still need to have real empathy for people that are experiencing change, right? That in my work, I feel like having empathy for the fears that people feel when change comes is a much better approach than kind of like beating people over the head with a stick that this has to happen. So we can go and look for other examples in the Southeast. I think that's a great question.
Well, I asked primarily because of our unique climate
Yeah,
issues.
yeah,
During the summertime, it gets very,
very
very
hot.
hot here.
Yeah.
And that's something that's thrown at us. The other difficulty we have is sometimes people just don't get it. I mean, we went through a whole discussion just a few weeks ago about just putting in some bike lanes
yeah,
on a portion of our city, but they had some fairly affluent individuals who were in opposition to it. We had a disaster of a rollout of something that was called Flagler Shore, and folks were just up in arms.
yeah.
So that's why I'm looking for help in how we can modify, refine the messaging of what we're trying to do, so that we don't have these pitchforks and knives battles.
Yeah, I think one thing is to look for we're always interested in finding low-hanging fruit and quick wins. And so, if there's a piece of the city that is against something, are there other parts of the city that are looking for it? And are those the places that we can focus on in the near term so that you can get something in? The other thing is that, this is why testing and piloting seems so important, because you can try something out for not very much investment and then listen to what people are saying about it. And when that moment happens where you try something and you listen and it doesn't work and then you change it, there's a new moment of trust, I think, that gets built into the system, which is, I think, what's happening on the historic Northwest. And so with the bike lane issue, I think, trying in places where people are asking for it first might be a good place to start.
Commissioner Shove.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for your presentation. Certainly some great wins, and thank you to Commissioner Nearing, the mayor, for their foresight on previous commissions. And I think something that you said was kind of touching on what my thoughts were. I think there's some really great projects. I see a lot of historic Northwest. I see a lot of downtown, and we're talking about 20 minutes to walk from one end of the city to the other, but that's really one end of the downtown to the other.
Yep.
We have a lot of areas in the north end. We have a lot in the south end on Antique Row, and even some out towards our western communities and into District 2 that I think, as we look, it's challenging, right? You can either do a little with a lot or a lot with a little. And so when you start to spread those efforts out, you need to make sure they don't get diluted. And perhaps we have that opportunity to concentrate those efforts, but just throughout the city, so that, I think there's some great takeaways here. Some I know certainly I'd welcome in the north end, I'm sure in the south end, and other district commissioners would be happy to take a look at. So if we can start to take a look at how can we implement some of these things, and I think it helps to the mayor's point of the communication. If it's only happening in the downtown and I don't see it outside my community, then I don't know about it. Whereas if I have something to point to that says, this happened on Northwood Road, this happened on Antique Row, this happened out in the villages, this happened in Ibis, wherever we may be, then it gives me something to point to and helps with that messaging. So thank you.
So, just to Commissioner Shove's point, and also to address some of the things the mayor mentioned, we are doing, for this coming fiscal year, we're going to be focusing on, I don't know if you saw really quickly up there, they mentioned 2-minute Tamarin. So a variation of that, which would be north of Palm Beach Lakes Boulevard along Tamarin, we're going to look at doing economic development, engaging that street, that Tamarin Avenue historic commercial corridor, and trying some commercial pilot programs there for this coming fiscal year. And we budgeted for that, and Wendy will be leading that effort. So that's one opportunity, I think, to address what you're talking about, as is also with the RISE initiative. I think there'll be opportunities there as well with different pilot projects that we can look at addressing in the north end. And of course, the south end, I think there's a lot of opportunities down there, especially if we get the golf course thing going in the very south part of the city. We can do a lot of different opportunities there, I think, to do some pilot programs and engage some folks as well.
Madam President.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you so much. That was a fascinating presentation. And, I found myself thinking about what you were saying about activity along the street and when you walk somewhere, because you're right. When we go and visit San Francisco, Boston, New York, it's no problem. We will literally walk for miles and not even think twice about it. But around here, and in most places in Florida, that's not really standard. But what really caught my attention was the slides that you had about the community input and the community feedback. And, I hope that that's something that we're able to carry on to other projects, and maybe, there's lessons learned. I'm sure there was quite an investment to be able to do that, but maybe there's other ways that we can implement that in other projects, because I think it was profound for you to share with us that the community is asking for even more of this now. They're taking ownership. They're opening and closing the library. They own this, and I think that's really fabulous.
I think a broader question, Commissioners, is whether this is a path that you want us to continue upon. Do you need more information? It is, in my view, it is an evolving landscape. So we welcome your input, as to the future of this. I don't want you to think it's etched in stone and that it's take it or leave it. This is really something that, we will weigh in on as to whether it's something we want to continue or modify or tweak. Yes, Commissioner Schoaf?
Thank you. I certainly think there have been some good wins here, and I personally, as part of this dais, would like to see us expand in a way that makes sense for us. Again, I don't want our efforts to be diluted. We have a big city. I realize we can't cover all areas at once, but I think what I see are a lot of great concentrated efforts within the downtown and the Northwest, and I think all of those projects, as demonstrated, have some really great merit. I'd like to see some concentration of effort in some of our other districts and things that make sense, again, so that we don't dilute the whole program. So I'm supportive of moving forward.
Mayor, if I could, one of the things that we're looking at in terms of evolving how we look at this is that engagement piece. So that was a lot of discussion here about that. So having more robust citizen and community engagement will be, part of this effort with your direction, of course. But that's something that we want to really do, is to concentrate on not just providing these pilot programs, but making sure we're engaging the community in these programs and getting that feedback and ensuring that we're doing what the neighborhood really is asking for.
Okay.
Just briefly, too, I want to say that I think if you think about it in terms of what Matthew said earlier about an umbrella, that it kind of can be we can use it for all the projects we're doing. And I think the 31st to 35th Street utility project is a classic example of that, where when you do a utility project, they don't really have the money to do above-ground interventions, but we have other monies in way of tree mitigation funds that when we're looking at a project holistically to see where we can have an impact on public life, we were able to do the trees. And then the community engagement. I literally walked door to door and had conversations with everybody on those streets about what trees they would like to see and how many they would like to see. So I think there's a way also that where we have projects already going, that we can weave this into those projects.
Okay. Commissioner Schoaf?
Thank you. Just to follow up on that, and while certainly appreciative of enhancing projects that are going on with trees and looking forward to the future, what I would like to see more of are things, I think there's a distinct difference between recreating an entire space, opening a Taylor Moxie library, and just improving what I think already the expectation is. So, those are the things I'd like to see us concentrate our efforts on, or something that we can point to say, here was a distinct improvement to public life. Not that, all of these things are very important, but I think the residents kind of expect a level. If you're replacing a street, you're replacing the lights, you're replacing the trees, which again, I understand has a funding mechanism behind it and doesn't always work out. And so appreciative of being able to take those resources and put them together. But the direction that I would like to see is to try to make sure we have something distinctly different to point to, not, I think what neighbors would look at as kind of the status quo.
Well, in closing this particular item, Commissioners, keep this in mind as we enter into some of our strategic planning discussions in a couple of months. Bookmark this as something that we might want to consider and how that could be folded into some of what our strategic priorities might be during that discussion. All right. Thank you very much. Very good presentation. Any other questions? Okay.